The master, I mean, Mr. Zorinsky, would prefer that all the guests remain downstairs, madam.
The master can blow me, monkey suit.
Ah yes, BloodRayne 2 is a game chock full of nostalgia for me. I still remember when I first got the game back in 2005. I was hooked on it for the longest time and sunk many hours into it. You wanna know something funny? I was around 13 years old when I went out and bought this game at my local GameStop, and they didn't ask me for proof of ID even though the game was rated M. I guess they really didn't give a shit back then. But hey, I ended up getting a fun game, so score! Like I mentioned in my review for the first game, I played the second game before I played the first one, and I consider the series to be pretty underrated. BloodRayne 2 is an action hack and slash game that was released on October 24, 2004, and was a sequel to the first game. It was released for the PS2 and Xbox. For this review, I'm going to be looking at the PS2 version. I want to apologize in advance as this review may be a little long, but it's just because there's so much to say about this game, and it's one of my all-time favorite PS2 games. So, sorry, but I do hope you enjoy. So how did BloodRayne 2 stack up? Was it a good sequel to the first game? Well, let's find out. Now I don't want to spoil too much of the story because while it's not amazing, it's actually not that bad. The story picks up right after the events of the first game. Rayne eventually locates her evil vampire father, Kagan, and is ready to take vengeance, but stops when she realizes Kagan has one of her friends held captive. But after being urged to run, her friend detonates himself along with Kagan, seemingly killing them both. Being disappointed that she wasn't the one to kill Kagan with her own hands, she spent the next 60 years hunting down his evil vampire offspring, or in this case, her half-siblings who were full vampire. During her killing spree, she learns from her new partner in crime, Severin, that the few remaining of Kagan's children have banded together and started the cult of Kagan. As Rayne learns more about the cult, she learns that they are trying to create something called the Shroud, a substance made from human blood that forms a large red cloud in the sky that blocks out the sun and allows vampires to walk during the day. Remember kids, vampires hate the sun. They don't fucking sparkle. They sizzle. Anyway, there's more to the plot that is discovered later on in the game, but for now, I'm not going to spoil anything. I will say this though, the ending of the game was such a huge cliffhanger that was totally setting up for a third game, but I'll go more into that later. But like I said, the story isn't groundbreaking by any means, but it was still entertaining, at least in my opinion. Rayne's personality is still snarky, but I also feel like she's a lot more outgoing compared to her more serious personality in the first game. I just love her sarcastic nature, and especially when she interacts with her partner Severin.
Damn it.
Well, that sounded expensive.
Sure did. Think I can expense it to Brimstone?
Let's wait till we see the final bill for this evening.
I'll keep my receipts.
The graphics in this game looked great for its time back in 2005. The lighting and shading effects were crisper, the environments had more texture, and the character models had more detail. The CGI cutscenes in this game looked amazing, and I mean amazing. Well, at least for its time. I mean, they could easily pass for early PS3 graphics, and remember folks, this game came out in 2005. This definitely shows in Rayne's updated CGI model, because she looked incredible here. I mean, the CGI in the first game looked good, but this game pushed it even further. Rayne's in-game character model looked very nice. Her face was a lot more refined, and her outfit had more detailing. Admittedly, her hair looks a little odd at certain angles close up, but it works. Rayne's vampire siblings look pretty cool as well. Well, with the exception of Zorinsky, as he was more on the generic side in terms of design. But the others looked bloody awesome, from a feral-like demon, to an entity of shadows, and even a guy looks like he took a page from good old Frankenstein. So yeah, I definitely enjoyed the boss designs in this game. This also applies to the enemy design, as they are much more diverse this time around. Though the enemies in the Mansion level looked like they took fashion advice from Hot Topic circa 2004. But nevertheless, I still enjoyed all the designs, especially the bondage ninjas and turned punks. They looked really cool. The gameplay is pretty much the same as it was in the first game. You go from point A to point B while slicing up any enemies that dare get in your way. Ha! I say that like they have a choice. They don't. Rayne still has her signature wrist blades and her trusty wrist harpoon, but kick attacks have been added to her combat. Kicking is great for knocking down opponents as well as disarming opponents that are holding weapons. Rayne's harpoon controls a lot better than it did in the first game, and unlike the first game, where it was mainly used to pull in enemies for feeding, you're now able to toss enemies anywhere you want, whether it be into walls, outside windows, or even sharp objects that are a part of the environment. It's just so funny seeing your enemies fly around like ragdolls. But that's not all, as Rayne now has blood pistols, which are pretty much her guns. However, instead of running on ammunition, they run on the blood of their handler and can only be used by dampiers. They do have bullets, but once you run out, if you continue shooting, Rayne's health will slowly deplete. As you play through the game, you'll earn upgrades for them that really come in handy later in the game. My personal favorite is the Bloodhammer upgrade because you get to do things like this. Sweet. And lastly, Rayne has new acrobatic skills which she can use to platform to higher areas. Rayne has definitely got quite the overhaul for her special abilities. In the first game, Rayne's main abilities were her aura vision, dilate perception, and blood rage, but in this game, they expanded upon them even more. As you progress through the game, you unlock new superpowers, and they range from speeding up time, to having your ghost feed upon your victims, or heck, even possessing said victim to fight for you. Yes, fight my minion, do my bidding. And summoning a vortex of blood to annihilate your opponents into nothingness. Blood Rage has also been improved, as you're able to activate it at any time you want, as long as you have energy in the meter below your health. And I'm especially happy that they ditched that annoying motion blur effect that you saw in her aura vision whenever you were running in the first game. Instead, they went for a simple blue lighting effect that covers the whole room and is definitely a lot easier on the eyes. Seriously, I always got a headache whenever I used the aura vision in the first game, so this was a great change. Rayne's movement is now free roaming compared to her strafe-like moving in the first game, which was another good change in my opinion. And thank God they switched the main attack button from L1 to the square button. Seriously, I hated that in the first game. Like I said before, when it comes to hack and slash games, you never want to assign L1 or R1 as the main attack button, because it's just so uncomfortable. One of the main things the game implements in the gameplay are the death traps, which range from furnaces, garbage trucks, fire pits, and water pumps to name a few. In order to progress further in some levels, you'll need to use your harpoon to launch a certain number of enemies into these hazards in order to progress further in the level. I have to say, some of these objects you have to toss your opponents into are Mortal Kombat worthy.
Fatality.
The enemies in this game put up more of a fight compared to the enemies in the first game. Granted, the first few you encounter are fairly weak, the enemies do become more challenging, especially when you encounter the bondage ninjas. These guys are a bit stronger than your average enemy, so you really have to stay on your toes when fighting them. However, the game does introduce mini-bosses that you encounter at various parts of the levels. You have evil Dampiers, who pretty much fight like Rayne, and look freaking badass. The Kestrel, who are also Dampier, who spoke in broken English, which was just adorable to listen to.
Oops, that for me. Gotta go now, pretty. But we deal with you later, okay?
You also have the Foreman and the Brutes, who are large powerhouses, the Shadow Legion, the Bio Armors, and the Kagan Elites. These mini-bosses can be very challenging, especially when you go up against more than one at the same time. I especially hated fighting the Bio Armors. These things used to terrify me when I was a kid, because they move so freaking fast for their size. But in saying that, these boss battles added more challenge to the game, which was definitely appreciated. Now the bosses in this game were okay. They're a lot more memorable than the ones in the first game. You have Zerensky, Slez, Feral, Ephemera, the Unraveler, and Zerks. But if I had to be honest, the only boss who put up much of a fight was the Unraveler, Zerks, and to a certain extent, Ephemera. The rest were pretty easy, which is honestly kinda disappointing. The final boss battle with Kagan also felt pretty underwhelming, if I had to be honest. It's just not as dynamic as I was expecting it to be, unlike the final boss in the first game. But what the bosses lacked in battle, they definitely made up for in presentation, and I liked how they all interacted with Rayne as well as each other. The music in this game is great. The tracks range from dark ambience to straight up industrial metal with a little bit of techno. The music definitely fits the atmosphere of the game, and the game's soundtrack is easily up there in my top 15 game soundtracks of all time. Seriously, it's that good in my opinion. Maybe not as iconic as Devil May Cry 3's music, but it's still definitely up there in my book. Unlike the first BloodRayne game, this game does have a little bit of replay value, as you're able to unlock things like concept art, cutscenes, and even new costumes. It's not a lot, but it's a step up from the first game that didn't have anything. At the end of the day, I found BloodRayne 2 to be an enjoyable game. Despite not having deeper replay value and having some cut content, it's still worth the play in my opinion, and I would highly recommend the game to anyone who's into good old-fashioned hack and slash games or games with a darker atmosphere. That said, my rating for BloodRayne 2 is a solid 9 out of 10. The only thing keeping me from giving it a score of 10 out of 10 was the lack of challenging boss battles, but other than that, the game was great. I mean, sure, the game does pander to a certain demographic, as even the developers admitted this, but if you can ignore it, you'll see just how fun it is playing as this red-haired vampire badass. So if you're into action games, I definitely recommend getting this game, as it's totally collection worthy in my opinion. And not to mention, it sells for pretty cheap these days. Unfortunately, this was the last BloodRayne game that the original developers made, which is a shame because they made so many improvements from the first game, and not to mention, the story ended on such a huge cliffhanger that was totally setting up for a third game. And sadly, Terminal Reality closed down in 2013, killing any chance for a proper third installment. So what happened to the BloodRayne series? Well, it did get 3 live action movies which were directed by the oh so lovely Uwe Boll, and as you probably figured out, they were utter trash that should have never seen the light of day. On the game front, we did get BloodRayne Betrayal, which was released in 2011 and was developed by independent game developer WayForward. Even though I loved how they revived the Shantae series, I can't say the same for BloodRayne. I mean, don't get me wrong, the game's art style was beautiful and are very reminiscent of the Castlevania games, but I just couldn't get into it. It didn't feel like BloodRayne to me, but I do give them props for trying. So yeah, BloodRayne was a pretty underrated series, but considering how it had to compete with games like Devil May Cry, God of War, Prince of Persia, and Onimusha, I can't say that I'm too surprised. It's just too bad that the BloodRayne franchise faded into obscurity. I would have loved to see a 7th generation BloodRayne game, but sadly, some things just weren't meant to be. Hey there guys, thanks so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more video game related videos coming soon. In the meantime, feel free to check out some of my other videos in the annotation boxes. And if you'd like to get a hold of me, my contact links are down below in the description. This is Decadent Gamer, and thanks for watching.